She cleaned the boardroom every morning before anyone else arrived, and she knew things about that company that no one thought to ask her. Petra Valdez had been a custodial staff member at Meridian Financial Group for 3 years. She pushed her cart down the hallways of the 42nd floor at 5:30 in the morning, and she did it quietly, the way a person does when they've learned that being quiet is a kind of protection. She emptied the wastebaskets, wiped down the glass tables, straightened the chairs, and she listened. Not eavesdropping, exactly. It was more that she simply paid attention when no one else thought she was capable of it. She was 29 years old. She had a business degree from the University of British Columbia that she'd finished in 2.5 years, working double shifts to pay for it. She had $214,000 in student debt in a small apartment in East Vancouver that she shared with her younger sister, who was studying nursing. She had a notebook in her cart, tucked between the replacement paper towel rolls, and she wrote things in it. Numbers, mostly. Patterns she'd noticed. Things that didn't add up. Nobody knew about the notebook. The 42nd floor belonged to the executive team. Petra had learned their routines the way you learn the habits of weather. Not because you're trying to, but because you live inside it. She knew that the VP of Strategy, a man named Gerald Ashford, left his printouts face down on the table after late evening meetings and never shredded them. She knew that the quarterly projections posted on the internal portal didn't match the numbers she saw scrawled on the whiteboards that hadn't been erased before she came to clean them. She knew that the Western Canada retail division was bleeding money in a way that the public reports hadn't mentioned yet. She knew because she added things up. She had always been good at adding things up. What she didn't know was that any of it was about to matter. The announcement came on a Tuesday. Meridian Financial was consolidating its retail banking division. 3 senior directors had resigned in the same week, and the CEO, a measured private man named Rowan Callister, had sent a company-wide email using words like restructuring and opportunity and fresh perspective. The kind of email that says a great deal without saying anything at all. There was a town hall scheduled for the following Thursday. All staff, all floors. Petra almost didn't go. She had a section to clean on the 39th floor during that window, and her supervisor had quietly suggested that the custodial team didn't really need to be there, that it was more of an executive thing. She had nodded and gone back to her cart. She was used to doors that were half open and then closed just before she reached them, but she went. She stood at the back of the auditorium. It was the converted conference space on the 2nd floor, rows of chairs filled mostly with people in suits and lanyards, and she listened to Rowan Callister speak. He was calm and careful, the way executives are when they're managing a problem they haven't solved yet. He talked about the retail division. He talked about the need for a new strategic direction. He said the company was open to ideas from anywhere within the organization. And then he said something that Petra couldn't stop thinking about. He said, "We're looking for someone who understands this company at every level. Not just the numbers on the page, but the real texture of it. If you believe you have something to contribute, I want to hear it." There was polite applause. A few senior managers exchanged glances. Someone near the front whispered something and laughed softly. Petra stood in the back row and thought about her notebook. She thought about the 17 months she'd spent cleaning the offices of the retail strategy team. She thought about the exit interview transcripts that had been left in the recycling bin. Not the shredder, the recycling bin. By someone who was either careless or indifferent. She thought about the pattern she'd noticed in the branch performance data, the one that told a very specific story about which communities Meridian was actually serving, and which ones it had quietly abandoned in favor of a demographic that looked better in a presentation deck. She thought, I know what's wrong. I've known for a long time. And then, before she could talk herself out of it, she raised her hand. The room didn't go silent dramatically the way it does in films. It went a particular kind of quiet that's worse than silence, the quiet of people who are trying not to react to something they find absurd. A woman near the front turned around to look. A director Petra recognized from the 42nd floor frowned slightly, the way people do when something doesn't compute. Rowan Callister looked at her. He didn't smirk. He didn't dismiss her. He simply said, "Yes, go ahead." Petra said her name. She said her position. She said it clearly, without apology, because she had decided in the 30 seconds since she raised her hand that she was done apologizing for who she was. And then she said, "I have some observations about the retail division's performance data that I think might be relevant to what you're describing. I've been tracking some patterns for about a year. I'd be grateful for the opportunity to present them." The frown from the director deepened. Someone behind her actually laughed. A quick, involuntary sound, quickly suppressed, but she heard it. Rowan Callister looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Come see me after this." On her way out of the auditorium, she passed Gerald Ashford. He looked at her the way people look at things that are in the wrong place. A chair in a doorway, a cloud in a forecast that said sunny. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She went to see Rowan Callister. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over Burrard Inlet, and on clear days you could see the North Shore Mountains. It was a clear day. Petra sat across from him with her notebook on her lap and her hands folded over it. He asked her to explain what she meant. So she did. She told him about the data she'd been compiling. She was careful about how she described her sources. She had never taken anything, never photographed anything, only observed and noted what was visible in shared spaces. He listened without interrupting. This was unusual. Most people, she had found, interrupted. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately read. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "Keeping notes?" "About 17 months, she said. "But I started noticing the patterns earlier than that. Maybe 8 months after I started here, and you never said anything." "I said things," Petra said. "I mentioned to my supervisor that the cleaning schedule for the data rooms felt inefficient and that I'd noticed some document disposal issues that were probably a compliance risk. She said she'd pass it on. I don't know if she did." She paused, "and I didn't have the kind of access that makes someone listen." Rowan Callister was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you put this into a formal presentation?" "I already have," she said. "I can have it formatted properly by Friday." He looked at her with the same unreadable expression. "I'll be honest with you. What you're describing, if it's what I think it is, isn't a small observation. It's a fundamental misalignment in our strategy that's been costing us for years." "I know," Petra said. "That's why I raised my hand." She went home that evening and sat at the small kitchen table while her sister made tea, and she told the whole story start to finish. Her sister, whose name was Roma, and who had the practical, unflinching manner of someone who spent shifts in an emergency ward, listened to all of it and then said, "Did you save your notes somewhere they can't access without your permission?" Petra had. She'd been emailing herself summaries from her personal account for months, time-stamped, with enough detail to establish when she'd written what. Roma nodded. "Good," she said, "because someone is going to try to say it was their idea." She was right. The presentation was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Rowan Callister had arranged it through his assistant. A small session with the senior leadership team, 7 people in a room. Petra had asked for a projector and a whiteboard. She'd spent the weekend refining her analysis, pulling in public data sources to support the internal patterns she'd observed, building something that could stand on its own even without the internal documents she couldn't formally cite. On Tuesday afternoon, she received a calendar invitation from Gerald Ashford. He was also presenting Wednesday morning to the senior leadership team on the retail division strategy. The time slot was 30 minutes before hers. She read the invitation twice. Then she called her sister. "Don't do anything yet," Roma said. "Go to your meeting, see what he presents. Have your time-stamped emails ready. And don't say a word until you know exactly what he took." Petra went to the meeting. She sat in the back of the boardroom again. She had been allocated a seat by the wall, the kind of seat that means you're attending but not participating. She watched Gerald Ashford stand at the front of the room with a slide deck that had a very polished cover slide that read, "Retail Division, a path forward." He spoke for 25 minutes. He talked about branch performance data. He talked about demographic misalignment. He talked about the gap between Meridian's community presence and its actual community engagement. He used words that were close enough to the words she'd used with Rowan Callister to make her stomach tighten, but different enough that she couldn't be certain, not yet. And then, on his second-to-last slide, he put up a breakdown of branch performance by neighborhood type, and the numbers were hers. Not similar numbers, her numbers. The specific ratios she had calculated, the framework she had built, presented as though he had built it himself. She looked at Rowan Callister. He was looking at the slide. His expression had gone very still. Gerald Ashford finished his presentation. There was a round of appreciative nodding. Someone said it was exactly the kind of thinking they needed right now. The head of retail operations said it was the clearest analysis he'd seen of the problem. Gerald Ashford smiled and accepted the compliments, and then Rowan Callister said, "Thank you, Gerald. We'll take a short break before the next presentation." The break was 10 minutes. Petra used 7 of them to pull up her email on her phone and forward the relevant threads to Rowan Callister's assistant with a short note. For Mr. Callister's reference before the 10 o'clock session. She had sent herself the original framework on a Sunday evening in March, 14 months ago. The timestamp was 9:47 p.m. When everyone returned to the boardroom, she stood up and walked to the front of the room. She did not look at Gerald Ashford. She introduced herself, her full name, her position, her 3 years with the company. She watched one of the directors raise his eyebrows at the word custodial, and she didn't pause, didn't acknowledge it, kept going. She presented her analysis. It was the same framework Gerald Ashford had presented, because it was hers, but she went further. She'd spent the weekend building out the second and third layer of it, the recommendations, the implementation sequence, the projected cost of doing nothing versus the projected return on a targeted reinvestment strategy. She had specific branch data, specific neighborhoods in the Lower Mainland and in the Calgary corridor where Meridian's footprint had shrunk in the past 4 years while competitors had grown. She had a proposal for a community reinvestment pilot program with a 6-month evaluation framework. The room was very quiet. She finished. She said thank you. She sat back down by the wall. There was a long pause. Then the head of retail operations said, "Can you go back to slide 4? She went back to slide 4. And then she answered questions for 45 minutes. Gerald Ashford sat very still through all of it. At one point he started to say something. She wasn't sure what. She suspected it was going to be a suggestion that the two of them had been working from the same base data. But Rowan Callister spoke first, asking a specific question about the Calgary numbers, and Gerald Ashford didn't finish the sentence. After the session, Rowan Callister asked her to stay behind. When the room cleared, he sat across from her at the long boardroom table and set her forwarded emails on the table between them. She'd printed them before she arrived that morning. "I received these before the meeting," he said. "I know," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you come to me before his presentation? When you saw the calendar invitation?" Petra thought about how to say this. "Because I needed you to see it," she said. "If I'd come to you the night before and said someone is going to steal my work, you would have had a choice to make based on my word. If you saw it happen in the room, you didn't need to take anyone's word for anything." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a very deliberate way of thinking about it." "I've had a lot of time to think clearly," she said. "It's actually quite useful cleaning offices. You can think about almost anything." He almost smiled. It was small, but it was there. He asked her to take on a contract role in the strategy team on a 3-month trial basis. He named a figure that was nearly 4 times what she earned. He said it would be reviewed at the end of the trial period with the possibility of a permanent position. She told him she would think about it overnight. She did think about it. She sat at the kitchen table again and Roma made tea again and they talked about it for a long time, the way sisters do when something is happening that neither of them is quite sure is real yet. "You should negotiate the title," Roma said. "I'm a custodian who identified a 7-figure strategic misalignment," Petra said. "I think I'll take what he offered and negotiate at the 3-month mark." Roma considered this. "Fair," she said. On Thursday morning, Petra accepted the contract. She wrote a professional email to Rowan Callister's assistant. She CC'd no one. She had one more morning shift on the 42nd floor before her transition date. She pushed her cart down the hallway at 5:30 the way she always had, and she cleaned the boardroom for the last time, wiped the glass table, straightened the chairs, emptied the bins. She was thorough about it, because she had always been thorough about things, and she didn't think that should change just because her circumstances were about to. She picked up a crumpled printout from the recycling bin near the whiteboard. She unfolded it out of habit, the habit of checking for documents that should have been shredded. It was a draft agenda for an upcoming board meeting. The first item was Retail Division Restructuring, New Strategic Framework. She set it face down on the table, exactly as she'd found it. Then she finished her shift, returned her cart to the supply room, and signed out for the last time. 3 months later, Rowan Callister offered her a permanent position as Senior Analyst, Retail Strategy. The figure he named was higher than the 3-month contract rate. He said the pilot program she'd designed for the Lower Mainland had already shown early indicators that were ahead of the 6-month projections. She asked for a week to consider it. She used the week to counteroffer. She had done her research, salary data, comparable roles at competing institutions, the specific value of the community reinvestment framework she'd built, which was now being discussed at a board level. She came back with a number and a title and a clear explanation of why both were appropriate. He agreed to both without negotiation. Gerald Ashford was still with the company. She passed him in the hallway sometimes. He was always careful to be professionally courteous, the kind of courtesy that has fear underneath it. She was always professionally courteous back. She had no interest in his discomfort. She had never been interested in that kind of victory. What she was interested in was the quarterly review she was presenting next month. She had 3 recommendations that she believed could return Meridian's community banking presence to something it hadn't been in nearly a decade, and she was going to present them clearly and completely and answer every question until the room understood what she was saying. The notebook was at her desk now, on the 42nd floor, in a proper office with a window. It was a new notebook, the old one she'd kept at home, evidence of a kind, archived in a drawer. She still used it the same way, writing down patterns, numbers, things that didn't add up yet. Some habits were worth keeping. She had cleaned this building in the dark for 3 years, learning its shape from the inside out, learning what it needed before it knew it needed anything. She had always known exactly what she was doing here.